Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Week 12 edition of the Rotoworld Waiver Wire Football Show. I will be firing off all of your start-sit for either Monday night, if you have any left, or for Week 12 start-sit decisions, your big waiver wire questions. This is a really kind of weird, interesting week for waiver wires with a lot of small injuries piling up. Or if you just have any general fantasy football questions, anything else you want to shoot my way, go ahead and fire away. Normally, myself and RotoPat are on this show. Patrick Daugherty is, I believe, supporting his country, watching the U.S. men's national team take on, I think it's Jamaica. I don't know for sure. Someone in chat figure out who the U.S. men's national team plays. I want to say it's Jamaica. He's watching that game, I believe, in St. Louis. So go U.S. men's team. I haven't followed that team since I don't know. It's been a few years. I remember I think it was the 2012 run where we beat the group of death. We went on to play Belgium. That went into extra time. Tim Howard, someone's chat graciously says that Jamaica is correct. Yeah, the 2012, I think it was 2012 team was Tim Howard in goal. Incredible, record-setting number of saves versus Belgium, and we still lost in extra time. It was really a fun time, and ever since then, my interest in the U.S. men's team has slowly trickled. But I see we are getting questions absolutely ripping, which is great because without Pat, I need your guys' support. Lindorfin's every single week tunes in live listener/watcher, says, Happy Monday. How would you rank these handcuff/bench stash running backs? Jonathan Brooks, Blake Corum, and Jordan Mason. Can only roster two of them behind the primary running backs being Kyron, Ken Walker, and Najee Harris. Half PPR if that matters. It shouldn't make a big difference. Blake Corum and Jordan Mason, I think it's abundantly clear that at best, they are an injury away from a really strong borderline RB1 role. But I think for both of them, their status as the 1-for-1 replacement to the starter is a bit up in the air. Blake Corum is now getting an every fourth series type of role. Last week, I believe he had 5 carries to Kyron Williams' 15. What is that? That is it was literally every fourth. So every fourth series type of role. And Jordan Mason, I think, is probably we saw it earlier in the year, so it's pretty safe to say he's the replacement for Christian McCaffrey should anything happen to CMC. But I will say, 4th-round pick spent on Isaac Guerendo looked really explosive in his very limited set of touches before CMC returned. So let's call it 80% sure that both Corum and Jordan Mason would subsume most, if not all, the touches taken on by the starter should anything happen to that player. I'm not 100% confident. The fact that Blake Corum, it took him 2.5 months at this point, or probably about 2 months, to even work into an every fourth series type of role. And the fact that he was struggling to get touches ahead of Ronnie Rivers to be that every fourth series type of player gives me a little pause that he would immediately take every Kyron snap. He would still be at least an RB2. But I think there was a world in which I say he's a locked-in top 5 running back should something happen to Kyron. And now I'm slightly less confident that's the case. And I think the same is roughly true of Jordan Mason. He was a top 5, maybe call it a top 8 fantasy running back when CMC missed time, but he has been banged up in the past, and Isaac Guerendo's looked pretty good on his limited touches, and we know Isaac Guerendo has a pretty good amount of draft capital backing him. I don't feel as good as I used to about their 1-for-1 ability. Jonathan Brooks, I drafted a lot of Jonathan Brooks, so there is a decent amount of bias coming from me. In either way, it's hard to say where the bias flows because in one sense, it should just be that I think Jonathan Brooks is good. I'm always going to give the bull case for him. But on the other hand, I've been so beaten down by getting 0 Jonathan Brooks points to this point, quite literally 0 to this point, that maybe it just goes the other way. Either way, acknowledging my bias, I will say I still think there is a realistic path for in weeks 14, 15, 16, for Jonathan Brooks to be going out there and getting on his own without an injury to the starter, 14, 15, 16 touches. Well, 16 is a little high. Let's call it 12 to 14 touches. He is a true 1B, maybe even 1A on an offense that really just wants to hide their quarterback and run the football, and can probably run the football somewhat well with 2 talented running backs. I think there's a path to 12-ish to 14 touches. 16 was a little bit high, to be fair. That's the aforementioned bias. That may have been it slipping through. Let's say 12-ish touches is a realistic, maybe not quite ceiling, but a relatively good outcome for him that just does not exist for Quorum or for Jordan Mason, barring an injury to the starters ahead of them, of course. So I'll say Jonathan Brooks is the mustache among the three. And then for the second one, I honestly think they're so similar in profile. I'll go with Blake Corum because I do think if one of them is going to be the one-for-one replacement, ironically, Jordan Mason hasn't literally been the one-for-one replacement, and Blake Corum has just not gotten the chance yet. I think the big difference is Jordan Mason showed a pretty clear inability to operate as a special pass catcher, so calling him the one-for-one replacement is a little generous, and we hadn't seen Isaac Guerrero until the very end of the Jordan Mason stretch. I don't think we're getting a ton of Ronnie Rivers if anything happens to Kyron. So I'll say very slightly Blake Corum over Mason, and then very clearly Jonathan Brooks over the rest of the other running backs. Thank you for the question. Oh, I see. We're getting some good questions, Rippin. So that's we're going to need them. I know last week we just made it to the end of the question. So please, if you're on the fence asking a question, go ahead and let it rip. We have DeAndre Hopkins or Jacoby Myers rest of season. This is an interesting one. Last week, Jacoby Myers did very little. I think he had 2 or 3 catches for like 28 yards, had a 20-yard carry, which I watched that game, and RotoPat had to remind me that was actually a team high. 1 carry for 20 yards was a team high in rushing yards. I think the next highest was 19 on the dot. And DeAndre Hopkins playing on an offense that just, I mean, say what you want about the Chiefs. I think they're a terrible fantasy bet outside of the running back who scores all of the touchdowns. I also think they're the best team in the NFL when it comes to the odds of winning a Super Bowl, because those two things don't always work in tandem. Most seasons, the best team in the regular season, the team that scores the most points, the team that we want their fantasy players, they ultimately go on to be one of the better Super Bowl contenders. I mean, this has literally been the Chiefs in the past, obviously. This is a very rare exception where those two things just don't coexist. It's not normal, but we have to accept it. With that being said, no, I think I'll still go Jacoby Myers. Up until last week, he had been clearly the team's number 1B or at times 1A receiver, with I think maybe the only cause for concern being if they start Desmond Ridder, which is entirely a possibility. I believe Aiden O'Connell right now on injured reserve. Not sure if we'll even see him at any point this year, again, at least. As long as they stick with Gardner Minshew is great. He's a good enough distributor of the football, as evidenced by Brock Bowers' 126 yards last week. And I think we'll see Jacoby Myers pop back up again. Whereas DeAndre Hopkins, I don't know what exactly is his role in this offense. Who's the number 1 pass catcher? Could still be Travis Kelce. Who's the number 1 big play threat? For a while last week, it seemed like Xavier Worthy. Then in the second half, that entirely disappeared. So I don't know exactly if he's going to be able to stick up to the, up until last week, elite target share, elite air yard share of Jacoby Myers. And when you look at what the offense provides as a whole, the Chiefs offense just isn't that good at scoring points and putting fantasy points on the table. They still get the job done for the most part. They lost last week. Who cares? They're still a very good offense at winning, and it's very hard to disentangle those two concepts. But for putting fantasy points on the table, feeding my kids the fantasy points they need to eat, Chiefs offense is not good, other than the running back. Running back's actually been really good this year. I'll go Jacoby Myers. Sickening stuff. I don't want to be the guy rooting against the Chiefs. I'm not rooting against them other than the fact that my fantasy teams, they're dead if they already had Chiefs. Lindorphins with a follow-up question. Would you like to move David Njoku, or Taysom Hill if you have both in a single tight end league? If so, which one do you want to hold on to? Or do you want to hold on to both in case of injury? If I want to move on from one of them, I guess it depends what kind of league you're in. Because I think in a 2015 casual league, everyone sees the Taysom Hill 35-point game and goes nuts. As you rightfully should. It was freaking awesome. But I think right now, in the landscape of 2024 fantasy football, even maybe your average league, maybe I'm overrating your average league, but in all the leagues I play in, and even the leagues like my friends play in that are more casual leagues, you're not just going to get the blatant point chasing. You're going to get the people who are chasing the talent of David Njoku, who is a really good real life player. He's a more valuable real life player than Taysom Hill. As a Taysom Hill lover, David Njoku is more valuable. But right now, Jameis Winston still targeting David Njoku a lot, but he is also peppering the wide receivers with targets. And I guess when I say peppering, the connotation there is like low value targets. No, he is just chucking it to the wide receivers on the boundary, down the field, trying to make chunk gains. It's not exactly perfect for David Njoku. I think for David Njoku, you want a more station-to-station offense where he's the number one target, and he's not the number one target. So I think his fantasy value he's kind of been one of the less benefited pass catchers of the offense. Like Cedric Tillman went from nothing to a borderline wide receiver 2. Elijah Moore, kind of the same. I mean, frankly, every one of these guys went from really no fantasy value to a ton of fantasy value, both with the Amari Cooper trade and with the addition to the starting lineup of Jameis Winston. And Njoku just hasn't hit that hyper speed level of you were nothing and now you're an incredible fantasy option. He was good before and he's good after, but it hasn't had a big change. So if I have to move on from one of these guys and I'm trying to gauge what my opponents, what the rest of my league mates want, they probably want the name brand value of David Njoku. And I think in the year of our Lord 2024, most people think that you're trying to sell high on Taysom Hill and they're not going to give you a good price. So trying to gauge what the market says, I'll move off of the name brand Njoku and I will just ride with Saints number 1 wide receiver and Saints number 2 running back Taysom Hill. And yeah, I do think in terms of should you trade one of them, yes, I would. I don't think you need to hold on to 2 probably like low end tight end ones. Just take one of them and move on. Do you think Bucks DST is worth a stash given the easy rest of season schedule? They've looked awful, but had some really good matchups. I have no clue who the Bucks play. Actually, I was going to look it up. I feel like Pat now. Jarrettston? Will Jarrettston. If you would be so gracious as to just plug the Bucks rest of season schedule for me. I was going to look it up, but I don't want to kill the dead air. Next question. You'll put it in the chat, and I promise you I will answer that. Next question. I'll just say from David. Is Cedric Tillman, said heads in the chat? Let me hear C. Give me a C in the chat if you're a said head. Is Cedric Tillman a must start? Probably. I mean, the way the Browns offense is playing, it's not going to win them a ton of games. If we're being honest, we don't care. That's awesome. I do not care if the Browns win another game from here until January 14th or whatever the last game of the year is. Probably a little earlier than that, because Jameis Winston is averaging well over 40 pass attempts a game, well over 400 air yards a game. Cedric Tillman, Elijah Moore, and Jerry Jeudy are all averaging at least 8.5 targets and over 100 air yards. All of them are. This is an offense that is designed to do one thing, and that's produce wide receiver fantasy points. I still think Cedric Tillman, despite being third among the wide receivers in targets last week, I believe third in air yards as well, he still had really strong market share numbers as far as they threw to 3 guys. They didn't throw to a ton of other guys, and it was a flat structure. Elijah Moore just narrowly led the team in air yard share, and Jerry Jeudy narrowly led the team in target share. And Cedric Tillman was third, but close in the race. I still think he's probably in the top 24 wide receivers. And the only change to me is that he probably fell when I was, if I did rankings last week, he would have been in that 15 to 20 range. He probably fell closer now to that 20 to 24. And we're bringing Elijah Moore up a little bit. We're bringing Jerry Jeudy up a little bit. This team has, I don't know if they have a top 20 receiver, but they have 3, at least wide receiver 3s. And I think Tillman is still a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 2 adjacent. I believe we're on a 6 teams on bye week 12 as well. I believe it's 6 teams. So in the context of that, on top of the actual good fantasy production up until last week of Tillman, you probably do have to start. I'm sorry. I got to read the next question. Should I start Ezekiel Elliott or Adrian Peterson? Depends which Adrian Peterson you ask, because old school fantasy players may remember Bears running back Adrian Peterson being the trade bait of the century every single week as you tried to con your opponents into starting him. Yeah, I mean, frankly, though, Zeke just feels so cooked. I mean, I don't want to jump to conclusions on, if you're not, it's Monday. I don't want to get too into this. The Mike McCarthy comments on, our job is to get Rico Dowdle more opportunities. He's the guy now. And then people kind of extrapolated that to no more committee. But I do think there's just nothing shaking behind him. Rico Dowdle is just a guy, but the backups behind him are less than just a guy. So I do feel somewhat good about Rico, albeit the offense under Cooper Rush is not going to be fun. Rest of season, who would you play? Calvin Ridley or Wilson? Which Wilson is this? Wilson has a great schedule, but so was Indy this past week. Who? Oh, Garrett. Oh my! I was legitimately locked on to Michael Wilson because obviously Garrett Wilson is a way better play than Calvin Ridley. With that being said, you do have to give some credit to the fact that Garrett Wilson did nothing last week, and Calvin Ridley has been really, really good in basically back-to-back weeks ever since they traded DeAndre Hopkins. His market share numbers were already percolating right before they traded DeAndre Hopkins. Wouldn't be surprised if that was some like, we can't let D-Hop get hurt. He's on the way out, so let's scale his role back a little bit. Point being, though, that for a month or more, Calvin Ridley has not just been a wide receiver one in terms of like his share of the numbers. He's been one of the number one overall receivers in terms of target share and air yard share. They just have no one else to throw it to. And the assignment has been understood by both Mason Rudolph and Will Levis that when you are dropping back, sure, every now and then throw a almost 100-yard touchdown to Nick Westbrook-Ikine. What's going on there? But in general, when you're dropping back, you look for Calvin Ridley, you move one down the read progression, then you go back to Calvin Ridley and you do it again. And it's been working out to basically wide receiver one or high-end wide receiver two numbers. On the other hand, I do think, all that being said, Calvin Ridley deserves a lot of credit. He's somewhat proven me wrong. I didn't draft much of him, and he's been really good, especially since trading DeAndre Hopkins. I do think we have to side with both a player in Garrett Wilson, who has similarly played an extremely high-value role and is probably more talented. I don't want to stir up controversy in the chat. I'm pretty sure Garrett Wilson is just overall, if you're drafting today, who would you rather have on your franchise? It's Garrett Wilson. And up until last week, I think he had like 6 fantasy points or something. It was truly awful. Up until last week, even with Devontae Adams out there, he was doing wide receiver one level stuff. Oh, I was really close. He had 4 for 18, so he 5.8 fantasy points. I think we want to side with a mixture of talent and role, and both of them have great roles, but Garrett Wilson is the more talented player. So I will say you should still, rest of season, take Garrett Wilson, albeit Calvin Ridley's done a good job closing the gap. Let's see. EVing Made Easy says Joe Montana or Dan Marino. I definitely have literally never watched either of these guys play football, but I know Dan Marino has like 2020 comic book level gimmick numbers, and he played in the 80s. Like, you should not be doing what Dan Marino did when football is such in its infancy as it was when he played. Like, among the non-Brady Mahomes players, like, he has to be the GOAT. Frankly, it's not even like close if you're like era adjusting his stuff. Should I be worried about TJ Hawkinson? David says. I do think it's a little concerning. I was actually just listening to the Rotoworld football week 11 that we're coming off, week 11 recap show. And I believe this was, apologies if I get the right or wrong, I'm pretty sure it was Eric Smolsky, was saying that especially in the second half and the fourth quarter, we saw the team easing up on the TJ Hawkinson usage. I think maybe that's a bit of an anomaly. They were also up around 10 points at that point in the game, but they're a good team. A 10-point lead is not a rare sight for the Minnesota Vikings. I know they've been, like, even despite winning, have been in a bit of a slump as of late, but a 10-point lead is something that they'll find themselves in relatively often. I do wonder if it's something where basically the moment they get to take their foot off the gas, TJ Hawkinson is one of the primary, what's the opposite of a beneficiary? The primary players being punished for them not trying to go out, pass with reckless abandon, and score points. Last week had a pretty brutal route rate of 57%. That's just not fantasy relevant territory, and only 10% of the targets. I know it was front weighted, and we care more about what happens in games that are the closest. That is more predictive. But I do think in terms of the rest of season outlook, even if it's just like a pulsing on and off. This week he gets up to, the week before this, for example, 71% of the routes, good, not great, but targeted on 30% of his routes and a 26% target share, 15 fantasy points, a top 5 tight end finish. That'll happen some weeks, but then some weeks you'll get last week, we get week 11, where they go out, they win, and they take it easy on him. They take him out for blocking snaps, but that also means he's taken out for some play action snaps. He's taken out for some snaps where a run is called and then they audible into a pass. And those are going to be painful. So I do think this coming back to earth week 11, where he just does not play a role that you associate with fantasy relevant players, I think that makes it tough to rank him as anything more than this fringe tight end 1. He's in the tight end 10, 11, 12 range. He's still really talented and he still has the ceiling of a high end role, but the floor is just not there anymore. So yeah, I think I'm worried, but I'm not cutting him. There aren't a ton of players I'm benching for. I'm going to say it's probably like 8 or 9 tight ends I'm benching him for. You still have to hold him, but I think it's fair to say last week was a frustrating outcome. Timothy Chan says, is Jaden Daniels still worth starting in a 1-quarterback league? He isn't rushing anymore, maybe because of the rib injury. Should I drop Daniels for Anthony Richardson? This is a really interesting question. So we have 2 players on sort of opposite trajectories. The arrows are pointing different. I still think the Jaden Daniels arrow, even as it definitely takes a bit of a nosedive, we haven't quite gotten the elite fantasy performances, the ceiling performances that we had thought we were getting in the first 5 weeks more recently. His arrows, I think, admittedly, by me, who drafted a ton of him, and of course by the haters, pointing down. It has not crossed the Rubicon of passing Anthony Richardson, who comes off an incredible week 11, his first game back in the lineup after, I believe, 2 weeks sitting for Joe Flacco, runs for 2 touchdowns. And this person, Timothy Chan, makes a really good point about the rushing production or lack thereof of Jaden Daniels. And it relates to Anthony Richardson quite well because in week 11, Anthony Richardson had 8 designed carries. That was not just a high for this year. I believe it was a career high in designed carries, despite being Derrick Henry with a cannon on his back. The Colts really have not had a ton of interest in designing their rushing game around him. I think part of that is he's a developing quarterback and you just need to get him to pass more. And part of it is that even if he isn't running the football, he makes the rest of the running game better. With that being said, for fantasy purposes, I don't care if he makes the running game better or if he needs to develop. Give me those freaking carries. Give me a 10 for 60 and 2 game. And although I don't think he got 10 or 60 last week, he did score 2 rushing touchdowns, I believe, from 6 and 2 yards out, if I remember correctly. Maybe it was 4. And that's what we need to see. We need red zone carries. We need overall rushing volume because as good as last week was, it was his best passing grade by PFF in his career. It was his highest completion percentage, 67%, on at least 16 attempts, so more than 15 attempts in his entire career. He didn't look great as a passer, but he did do better, both by the film watchers. I'm going to associate that with PFF, just by the raw metrics, by his completion rate. I don't think we can count on him to be this consistent, even 200 or 250 yard passer. We need the rushing volume, and I will not grant that 1 week, as good as it was in terms of the designed carries, and obviously the inside the 5 or inside the 6 technically carries, I don't want to say that that's exactly what we're going to get for the rest of the season. I'm just going to rely on the talent of the player. And we know Jaden Daniels is supremely talented, probably the best first or second year quarterback we've seen in a very long time. So I'm going to stick with Jaden Daniels. I think the fact that defense has been a little better as of late has definitely not helped him. But I want to say that if we have a quarterback who has been leading the league in all of the efficiency metrics, especially among the young players, but just in general, he's been top 5, top 6 in all the efficiency metrics throughout the year. And we have a quarterback who was benched because he was so inaccurate. We can't move off of our priors after 1 game. I think I'm a little uneasy seeing Jaden Daniels just not getting the spike weeks, but especially at quarterback, where we're not chasing volume as much as a position like running back. We want to rely on who we think is really good. And Jaden Daniels is really good. I love Anthony Richardson. I don't know what his future looks like in the NFL, and that makes it really hard to be confident in him as a fantasy asset. Next question. Ringside Rips says 10-man half PPR. I have Herbert. I assume, Justin Herbert. Should I try to pick up Anthony Richardson or Bo Nix as well, or do I go after a high-end handcuff like Trey Benson? I have Ramondre, and he's been a tough to play as of lately. Understandably so. It's not been the best offense. It's been better. I guess it's been better under Drake May, but it has, it's come in fits and spurts, and Ramondre has just not been particularly efficient this year, which compounds the issue. I don't know. To me, if I have Justin Herbert, I am feeling really good about the way things are going. If you look at his season-long numbers, they're really not going to be that special. But looking at what he's done over the past month or two, I believe they had their bye in week 5 and they came out of it in week 6. And they have been a pretty strong, more pass-heavy type of offense. And we've seen this. I know there are a lot of reasons that Justin Herbert's passing volume has been insane throughout his career. But Pat, who can't be with us today because he's supporting his country, watching the U.S. men's national team beat Jamaica, hopefully, has said time and time again that passing volume is a quarterback stat. And I think there's room to argue with that, but I think it is completely accurate in the broad scope of the NFL. The guys coaches let pass the football more. They let them do that because they're good. And it took 4 weeks for the most run-heavy staff in the NFL to realize that Justin Herbert is the engine of their offense. And now he's looking better than ever. I believe they have some potentially high-scoring games coming up as well. I want to say they get maybe it's the Bills this week. I'll look up their schedule real quick. But I know they have some fun playoff decide. Oh, it's the Ravens. That's what it is. They get Ravens this week, which should be awesome. The Ravens defense, I get that they bottled up Russell Wilson. Don't care. The Ravens defense has been bleeding chunk plays to opponents. And I want to be totally in on Justin Herbert playing that game. We just saw their next opponent, the Falcons, get eviscerated by freaking Bo Nix. I like Bo Nix. I drafted a lot of Bo Nix. You cannot give up 300-something yards and 4 touchdowns to Bo Nix. Terrible Falcons defense. And then a good defense against the Chiefs, but also maybe a fun scoring game, although the Chiefs don't care about playing fun scoring football anymore. After that, the Buccaneers, who are bottom 5 in fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. That's Ravens, awesome matchup. Falcons, awesome matchup. Chiefs, so-so, although maybe some points scored there, at least 2 good quarterbacks, whatever. But then Bucks, awesome matchup. I'm not really trying to hold either of Anthony Richardson or Bo Nix, both of whom are good to really good fantasy options. Just give me the guy who gets 3 shootouts in the next 4 weeks in Justin Herbert and is the most talented of the bunch as well. So, I like Bo Nix. I like Anthony Richardson, but it is what it is. Who's next year's 101? EV Made Easy said. Oh, who do I think it is? I think it'll probably be Ja'Marr Chase. I don't think it'll be Brees. The team is just kind of floundering at this point. He's really good. Bijan is giving up too much. He didn't last week, but he's generally giving up too much work to be this clear 101, like we've seen with CMC in years past and Jonathan Taylor. And I think unless we get any weird contract stuff, I think Ja'Marr Chase continues to close out this season as the clear wide receiver 1. No issue for taking him. Yeah, that's going to be my pick, with the only exception being how does CMC finish the year? But we'll get a ton of people saying like, oh, he's old, he's injured. I'm sure I will say this. He's old. He was injured last year. And at this point, he has not been particularly efficient. It's only been 2 games. We really can't take much away from it. But an old banged up running back who's inefficient is going to draw a bit of questions from the fantasy community. So if I have to pick, I'm going to say it'll be Ja'Marr Chase. What else do we got here? Bandit, longtime listener, also definitely not first-time caller, says, when writing 32 stats, do you ever wish you had titled, oh, damn it, this is a good question. When writing 32 stats, do you ever wish you had titled the column 10 stats to know? It just seems like a lot of work. No, you know what? I actually like the structure of it. And for the inside baseball fans, 32 stats doesn't always contain 32 teams because I don't do the teams on bye. No, I don't know. Something about me getting to look at every team and figuring out what changed last week. What do we need to know? What's one or the most interesting thing about every team makes me better, albeit it is easily the most tedious article I have to write. Just like you said, it's just 32 freaking teams. And I'm like, some of these teams like the Rams, when they're at full strength, they play the same game of football every single week. They throw to 2 players and they run with 1 player. and they don't throw the tight end, and that's it. There's not a ton interesting to say. That's not entirely been true recently. So yeah, some of them become more tedious, but I do think it helps keep me as sharp as possible. And it does help because I publish that on Wednesdays. It does help me get prepared for the Thursday show. Eric Alvarez says, Tank Dell or Josh Downs rest of season. I think it's Josh Downs. I'm going to reference Rotopad a bunch on the show because he's usually here as my co-pilot. Josh Downs is a freaking superstar, man. I love Anthony Richardson. I will say if Josh Downs played, I frankly switched spots, Josh Downs and Tank Dell, Josh Downs is like a weekly wide receiver 10 overall. He is such an elite target commander, but he does it in a way that's not nearly as scammy as Wan'Dale Robinson because he's adding surplus value to the offense on every single play. And we've seen in his past two Anthony Richardson starts that they're not completely unwilling to actually push him downfield. I don't think that's his primary strength, but the fact that they're not using him as the underneath outlet 8 yards per target kind of player. They're willing to say that when push comes to shove, you're also our best receiver at 10 plus yards downfield. Your specialty is probably less than that. And it's probably sub 10 ADOT, but we can use you at any point in the field and you will eventually make some wins. I think even with Anthony Richardson under center, I'm going to go Josh Downs. I think he's a screaming buy in dynasty. When we have so confidently locked in on someone as an elite talent, I'm willing to fade the short-term situation of Anthony Richardson is not an accurate quarterback, especially as it relates to Josh Downs. I don't care, man. Josh Downs is awesome. Chow Chad TV says, speaking of wide receiver volume, is Devon Vele now a must start for the Denver Broncos? No, probably not. I think the biggest issue is not what his week 11 volume was, is that it's the consistency or lack thereof, obviously, in the Denver offense as far as how it utilizes its players. We saw Sean Payton talk up multiple weeks in a row. Audric Estime is the guy. And last week is when it all came to a head because we had just come off of, I believe, a 14 carry game, 14 of 17 running back carries. And Payton tells everyone, guys, it's Estime's backfield. We got to get him more touches. He's the man. And then they go out and just make Javonte Williams the guy. And we've seen this with Devon Vele too. Early in the year, he got banged up with, I believe, a rib injury. And even once he was healthy, they were just healthy scratching him. And now we're seeing Marvin Mims get a little more involved. We're seeing Troy Franklin get a little more involved. Of course, little Jordan Humphrey scores a late touchdown. I just don't think there's any predictability in the individual roles of the players right now. And I would need like a month of Devon Vele nonstop, the team's wide receiver 1, or I guess in this case, the wide receiver 2, because it's always going to be Courtland Sutton. So I don't think he's a must start. I think he is an option. I think he's their second best receiver on the team behind Courtland Sutton. It seems like every time he's out there on the field, he's an elite target earner. But they don't seem to think that as much as I do. Their confidence in Devon Vele is somehow less than mine is. I didn't even like him as a prospect. So not an every week starter. Do I think he's in that wide receiver 4-5 range going forward? That's probably the case, but I wouldn't say that. Doesn't make him an every week starter. Let's see, what else do we got here? Tons of questions, which is much appreciated. Here we go. This is unfortunately a frustrating but good one. Is it time to drop Deontay Johnson? This is really weird because Deontay Johnson, maybe not the most efficient wide receiver, but I am a sucker for a wide receiver who just goes out and earns targets. Like, I think earning a target, going out, like, what all goes into earning a target? You have to, throughout a week of practice, throughout a summer, prove that you're one of the 3 or sometimes 2 or even 1, but mostly 2 or 3 best wide receivers on your team to just earn the route. Then you have to be a part of the team's game plan on that individual play. You have to be somewhere in the read progression, ideally early in the read progression. And then you have to beat an opposing cornerback and you have to beat the opponent's plan to stop you. So earning targets is, I think, our most predictive skill for wide receivers. And throughout his career, Deontay Johnson has earned targets on multiple teams with multiple quarterbacks. And yet the Ravens do not want to give him the football. He had a 17% route rate last week. If that was his target share, it would be disappointing. He had a 7% target share. He is entirely droppable. I think at some point in my life, I'll see him get 5 targets as a Baltimore Raven. I don't even know what's going to happen in the regular season. I don't know why they have zero interest in playing him. it's not like they have this absolute litany of weapons where they just can't find a way to get him involved. Rashad Bateman's fine. I think Zay Flowers is really good. I still think Mark Andrews has juice. But I've already just about run out. I mean, Isaiah Likely, again, I think he's a good backup or a low-end starter. That's 4 guys who I think one's really good and the rest are regular good or even less. And even with that modest competition for snaps, targets, etc., they just aren't even putting him on the field. And because they're not putting him on the field, and even when they put him on the field, it's not for these specifically designed for him plays, I do think Deontay Johnson is absolutely a cut if you have a ton of options available. If you need a running back and there's someone out there, like even Amir Abdullah, which is so sick, but even Amir Abdullah, you could cut Deontay Johnson for him because Alexander Madison is hurt, Samir White is hurt. If you need touches, Amir Abdullah is going to give you them, and Deontay Johnson, running back or receiver, is not giving you touches. So here we go. Here's another sicko one. TJ Hawkinson or Will Dissly, half PPR, rest of season. Oof. I think I'll go TJ Hawkinson. I drafted some Will Dissly. I'm not ashamed to admit it. Drafted a little bit of Will Dissly. This kind of falls back to something I said earlier when we have a lot of ideas on who is more talented here. And I think TJ Hawkinson is vastly more talented. And we saw 2 weeks ago that the team was very willing to give him a lot of targets. That did not happen last week. But I'm still going to stick with TJ Hawkinson, albeit it's frustratingly close between the two. What else we got here? Oh, man. Cap for Life says Anthony Richardson or Sam Darnold. Just give me Richardson. I think I took Jaden Daniels over Richardson earlier, but I will say this. Sam Darnold, all of the cracks in the facade are beginning to show with his play style, with what the team can do with him. Last week, they were a bit more pass heavy, but over the past month or two, they have been a bit more cagey with how they deploy their passing game approach, running the football more. Now they seem to have a backup they're more confident in Cam Akers. So they're going to probably scale his volume back. I mean, they've already done it, I guess is what I'm saying. And his efficiency is plummeting, not even because his accuracy is a problem. It's because his decision-making in terms of taking sacks, throwing interceptions, finding open players has really all come apart. I don't think he's completely unviable for fantasy purposes, but at this point, when we're talking about volume being a concern, efficiency for the overall offense being a concern, those are things we commonly say about Anthony Richardson, but he's also an elite super athlete. So I'll take Anthony Richardson over him. What else do we got here? Oh, Chow Chat, I think asking about the Bucs schedule or bringing up the Bucs schedule. Panthers twice. Oh, hell yeah. Giants, Cowboys, Raiders. Chargers sucks, but absolutely. I don't even remember what the question was. It was just something about stashing the Bucs. Yeah, for me, the operative point of any defense versus offensive matchup when I'm trying to stream defenses is just what quarterback do they play. Because we talked so much about how pressures and sacks are, at least in part, if not in a large part, quarterback stat, because quarterbacks always have a choice between throwing it away, throwing it into a tight window, or taking the sack, in terms of when push comes to shove, which bad decision do they want to make? And a lot of quarterbacks just end up taking the sack. The Panthers have that quarterback. Raiders might have that quarterback. Giants, Giants with Tommy DeVito have that quarterback in spades. So yeah, I actually think, we want to take good matchups, bad quarterbacks. And if the Bucs have Panthers, Giants, Cowboys, Raiders, Chargers, and Saints, it's pretty good. Another defensive question, or I guess defensive related. I have Vikings D and Kaimi Fairbairn. Any reason to big brain this or roll with them for the rest of the season? I just talked about defensive matchups, and I don't know the Vikings schedule. If they have a bunch of hard quarterbacks, I think it's fine to maybe move on from them. But the Vikings are so good that the only quarterback matchups that would scare me are like Lamar, Hurts, Josh Allen, and maybe Mahomes, and that's like it. So unless they play those guys a bunch, you're fine. And Kaimi Fairbairn, freaking goated kicker. Do not move on from him. What else we got? Let's see. Oh, this is an easy one. Trade Josh Jacobs for DK Metcalf. Yeah, I am legit. If I'm a DK Metcalf, I guess you are getting DK Metcalf. So no, give me the Jacobs side, however I have to answer this. Give me the Jacobs side. If I'm a DK Metcalf owner, I'm concerned about the breakout of Jackson Smith-Njigba, who again looked like the team's wide receiver one last week. And that was, of course, in DK Metcalf's first game back after missing 2 games, plus the bye with, I believe, a knee injury. So yeah, no, give me Jacobs in this 1v1. What else do we got here? Is Jonnu Smith a viable flex option over Romeo Doubs in non-PPR leagues? I mean, is he a viable option? Sure. I think it's probably a more matchup dependent one because they're both in that same range in terms of they're decent flex options. They'll probably end up disappointing you at some point, but I'll probably just end up taking Jonnu Smith. I believe he tied for a team high in targets yet again last week. They have totally moved their offense. The Dolphins have from let's just throw to our only 2 good pass catchers, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, to let's spread the love around. What does Jonnu Smith have? What does Devon Achane have? I think part of it is in an effort to protect Tua, get these quick hitting plays out where Devon Achane screen, open, let him do damage after the catch. Jonnu Smith is a damage after the catch monster, so we don't necessarily need to throw Tyreek Hill every play. Tyreek Hill is banged up. I do think their offense has been figured out to a degree. So I think Jonnu Smith's role is here to stay. And if you give me straight up, I guess I will take Jonnu. Are we playing Pacheco if he plays next week, no matter what? Yeah, probably. I will say NFL Network's Ian Rappaport points out that he was very cagey with his words in his reporting, saying that he expects, or it's believed to be the case, that Isaiah Pacheco will be healthy enough to play in week 12. Not that he will play in week 12, that he's healthy enough to play in week 12. I believe they get a short turnaround from 12 to week 13 because of they play on like Black Friday or something stupid. I don't know. But point being, there's a short turnaround somewhere in there that they believe Pacheco could return in week 12. Rappaport was very clear to not say that he is locked into playing in week 12. So I'd just be cautious with that. Better stash, Roschon Johnson or Audric Estime. I still think it's Estime. I complained endlessly about Estime earlier. But Roschon Johnson really just doesn't have any chance of unseating DeAndre Swift. We've already seen Estime unseat Javonte Williams once, and then he unseated him last week. So I'll say you still want Estime because he could be the guy. Thinking of playing Kyler over Jaden Daniels next week. Thoughts? Let me see who they play. Cardinals schedule. I mean, we have really seen Kyler start to break out, and he gets a pretty solid matchup with the Seahawks next week. Commanders, on the other hand, we of course all know that the Washington Commanders plays the Dallas Cowboys. Oh man, what an inept team. Frankly, their matchup with the Cowboys, as much as the Cowboys defense has fallen off, the Cowboys aren't going to be able to contend with them. We're probably just going to see so many rush attempts from this team, probably putting an autopilot in the second half, that I'll go Kyler. Jameson Williams or Cedric Tillman rest of season. I'll go Jameson. This Lions team is gnarly. Oh man, are you at a dentist? This is just I've gotten multiple comments about my apartment. There's a window there. You can see the thing on the window is a little screen is broken on the window. There's a desk there. It doesn't even look like a dentist's office. And I hate the dentist. Scares the mess out of me. So I'd never be at a dentist's office. You wouldn't catch me dead there. Would you trust MVS, Jameson Williams, or Nick Westbrook-Akine over Marvin Harrison Jr.? No, that's fine. No, not on your life. Jameson's really good, but I do think outside of an interesting weeks 1, 2, and 3, he's mostly proven to be a very good and as consistent as you can be, exclusively a deep threat. And that makes me a little concerned. MHJ consistently sees among the best air yard share and a really strong target share. So I'm still going MHJ, although I get that it can be a frustrating outcome. Would you trade Brian Thomas for TJ Hawkinson? Team is Jacobs, Kamara, Chase Brown, Tyreek Hill plus Puka Nacua, so I have no room to start him. Currently just streaming. Yeah, I mean, if you're not starting him, go for it. They're on bye next week. We don't know if Trevor Lawrence comes back the week after that. They're definitely firing their head coach. So yeah, that makes sense to me. Voda says, hey Kyle, I'm looking to shop Brian Robinson for another running back because he is one of 3 running backs on my team, has a bye in week 14, and you have Derrick Henry and Joe Mixon. Who do you think is a good trade target for Brian Robinson? I don't know. Let me get back to you on that. Because really, think right now with Brian Robinson, the best you can do is just pencil him in for 50% of the 50 to 60% of the running back carries, not a ton of receiving volume. Although next week, like I said, is a pretty good matchup. You're not starting him over your two guys, though. Frankly, I don't know if I entirely see the point of trading him if you're just getting another running back in return. Also, though, I just like Brian Robinson. I know his role isn't great, but I do think he's a pretty good player. So let me see if I can throw out a name for you on someone I'm looking to trade for him. Like who has some late season upside, someone with some juice that you could really. The only one I can come up with is like, could you get a Tyrone Tracy potentially? I love Tyrone Tracy, super good home run hitter, converted wide receiver to running back. Yeah, that's like it. Yeah, just stick with Brian Robinson. I know it's been a little frustrating, but unless you can get someone with true late season upside where they just take over, and yeah, I wouldn't really move on from anyone. I don't know. I'm a big sucker, honestly, for Brian Robinson, if I'm being honest. All right, I'll rapid fire through your questions. We got a little less than 10 minutes left. What else do we got? Oh, should I trade Josh Jacobs and get Isaiah Pacheco? No, you should just stick with Josh Jacobs. I do not know exactly what role we're going to see for Isaiah Pacheco coming back. Kareem Hunt has been so incredibly unexplosive, but he keeps the chains moving. He's had a positive EPA on the team despite having one of the league's worst explosive run rates. The explosive runs are what makes the EPA machine go burr, but the fact that he just doesn't lose a ton of yards, he consistently gets what's blocked, and he scores a lot. Like when he's asked of it, he gets the touchdowns that are needed. He's been good enough for the team. He's been good for the team that I don't know entirely what the Isaiah Pacheco role looks like. If you told me Kareem Hunt never existed and Pacheco comes back to 20 touches a game, yes, I would take Pacheco over Jacobs. But that's just not how we live in the year of our Lord 2024, week 12 of the whatever season. Time for stashes. How would you rank Trey Benson, Audric Estime, Blake Corum, and Braylon Allen? Give me Audric Estime first. That offense is playing really good football, and he is the only one of these guys who can, through his own play, unseat the starter and make it a one-man backfield. Will we see that? Sean Payton certainly thinks we won't, and he's the man in charge. That makes it frustrating. But Braylon Allen is never playing well enough to take the number one role. Blake Corum, the same thing. Trey Benson, the same thing. Audric Estime can be the starter. So I will say Audric Estime, then give me Trey Benson. I do think Trey Benson could force a 1B or number 2 role. Braylon Allen, and then Blake Corum. That's how I'd rank them. Thank you very much. What else do we got here? People keep talking about my apartment. I'm trying not to say mean things. It's a perfectly normal apartment. I don't know why you guys say anything about it. What else do we got? All right. Throw some last questions in chat and we can head out here. If I missed your question, I'm sure I jumped through a few different questions. If I missed your question, just bump it to the bottom and I'll get there. Laney Horn says, should I trade Jaden Reed for Courtland Sutton? Reed has smashed weeks 14 through 17, so I'm hesitant to do so. Of course. I mean, I am just a sucker for Jaden Reed. I think he's one of the most explosive players in the NFL, but he's not explosive in the way that, like, on a technicality, MVS is explosive. His catches go for a lot of yards because he only catches balls 40 yards downfield, and that's not a way to make a sustainable living. I think Jaden Reed is much more the explosive with his ball in his hands, but can win downfield, can win in all ranges of the field because he's just that kind of player. Is he a true alpha? It doesn't necessarily seem like that. It kind of frustrates me that he's not dominating the targets for this team. They have a lot of good wide receivers on the Packers. On the other hand, you get sort of the steady week in and week out production of Courtland Sutton, where I think he had like multiple 100-yard games in a row. Last week, not the case, but still, yeah. So his box score, 8 for 100, 7 for 122, 6 for 70, 7 for 78. Ugh. I think the projection nerd in me says, just take Courtland Sutton, whatever. If you want to win at fantasy football by scoring the most points, go ahead, take Courtland Sutton. He's frankly the number one receiver on a passing attack that has played really well since about week 5, since their Jets game where they played like garbage and still won. Turns out it's kind of easy to just play like crap against the Jets and win. Who knew? But since then, it's been a very good Broncos passing attack, and Courtland Sutton has dominated targets. I'm a Jaden Reed slappy. I think the answer is Courtland Sutton. Not fun. Thanks for asking me that question. Thank you very much. All right, let's see. I'll rip through a few more questions in here. Chris Sales says, should I trust Drake May over pickup Jameis Winston, Anthony Richardson, or Minshew in week 12? I mean, I am definitely not starting Minshew. I do think I would take Richardson over May. The volume-based quarterback play is a trap 9 times out of 10. The reason quarterbacks get a lot of volume, especially when they get up to when volume is the only selling point, right? Like good quarterbacks get a lot of volume. Strangely, some bad quarterbacks get a lot of volume. And, it's kind of easy to see good quarterbacks deserve to throw the football more. Their play convinces their teams that throwing the football is good. They throw the football more. But at the other end, it's probably like a parabola. At the other end of the parabola, really bad quarterbacks, they lose football games. And losing football teams throw the football more. And typically, unless you find yourself on the good quarterbacks end of the parabola, volume is bad. Like the volume shouldn't be the only selling point. My good quarterback gets to throw the football a lot. That's good volume. My bad quarterback gets to throw the football a lot. That's bad volume. I do think Jameis Winston's probably a bad quarterback, but I think he's the one exception of he might get there in garbage time. Well, he's going to throw 40 times that actually holds up. And I think it's specifically because, especially right now, a lot of the bad quarterbacks are bad because they can't make the big play. It's the Mac Jones problem. You could tell me Mac Jones got 50 attempts. I frankly don't even know if that gets him to 250 yards. He just cannot make high efficiency plays at all. Like he just has no ability to really string together a game full of chunk plays. Whereas as bad as Jameis Winston is, he throws or attempts to throw 3 interceptions every game. He's also throwing 9 to 10 yards downfield. Every one of his pass attempts is designed to gain 10 plus yards, which I think is why the volume quarterback for most instances is dead right now. We don't have quarterbacks who are bad but aggressive. Jameis Winston is one of our very few exceptions, who's bad, aggressive, and his team lets him throw the football a lot. You need those 3 things, and it's something that you shouldn't really be doing. If you're bad, your team doesn't want you to throw the football. And you just throw downfield and throw picks, your team shouldn't want you to throw the football. But the Browns let Jameis Winston throw downfield every play, and I'm going to start him over these other guys. Let's see. What else do we got here? We'll ride with this as our last question, I think. If anyone has anything else, you can do it real quick. We're starting Will Dissly rest of season over Mark Andrews. I still think I'm going to take Mark Andrews because Will Dissly, as good as he's been, his route rate has kind of been capped in that 60 to 70% range in the past few weeks. Even last week with Hayden Hurst, I believe a healthy scratch, but out nonetheless, we only got 60% of the routes. Mark Andrews was a little over 50. But if we're saying 2 players only get 60% of the routes, give me Mark Andrews, even if it's been frustrating. And I think that's a very specific comparison to Will Dissly because as good as he's been, he's also not 100% in this full-time role. And we get to compare him in this instance to who used to be a superstar. And in some of the advanced metrics still looks very good in Mark Andrews. All right, Lindorphins, last question, I promise. Last question. If there's still time, how would you rank these wide receivers rest of season? Christian Watson, Jerry Jeudy, Quentin Johnston, Xavier Worthy. I will go, this is a tough one. I hate to say it. You can put Xavier Worthy at the end. Even in his good game, it was all the first drive, and they have the terrible, he steps out of bounds, doesn't get 2 feet in once again, which he did last week or 2 weeks ago as well. I think the idea of Xavier Worthy with Patrick Mahomes is very interesting. I think when rubber hits the road, it just doesn't end up working. Christian Watson, Jerry Jeudy, Quentin Johnston. I'll just bluntly rank them. Jerry Jeudy, Christian Watson, Quentin Johnston. Final answer, final question. Thank you all very much for tuning in. Thank you for questions wall to wall. Otherwise, the show wouldn't be able to go on as long. Like, subscribe, do whatever you do on your podcast platform to the Rotoworld Football Show. Pat and Denny, I believe, will be on this feed tomorrow. We will all be back together on Thursday to preview Week 12 games. And of course, I'll be back with Pat next week to do this. Thank you all very much. We will talk to you very, very soon.